Hi, Roy here on my channel, Roy Reads Anything, and it's Giant Ape-ril, so this is another video looking at big hairy monsters and other oversized threats. And so it's a month-long event. The idea is to read, maybe watch some kind of giant monster type stuff, and there's co-hosts as well, all linked to down below. So today, it's 1976. 1976, a year which I remember as having in Britain a heat wave, a plague of ladybirds, and also the first stirrings of what would become punk rock.
It was the same year I went to university. First time as well.
It's the year of Jennie going to Loughborough University. And a sort of year of the ape, because coming up towards the end of the year was the King Kong remake film, the one with Jeff Bridges and Jessica Tandy. Jessica Lange. Jessica Lange.
Jessica Tandy driving Miss Daisy.
Yeah.
That would have been better.
Jessica,
I'd pay money to see that film.
Well, you never know. So, the movie, not going to talk too much about that. People have different views about it. Maybe it's a bit too camp. Maybe it's great in many ways. I saw it at the time, and I was kind of in the market for it, I suppose, being a young teenager. But just the fact that the movie was coming and it was predicted to be a big movie meant that lots of other apey things kind of followed in its wake, and included other movies of the kind of very, very, very low budget parody sort. Cue clips.
C8.
Of which the less said the better, really. But I'm here to talk really about printed stuff that came along, because it being the year of Kong. You'd think there'd be a novelisation, but probably due to rights issues there wasn't. They reissued the 1933 novelisation of the original movie. There was this, actually a making-of book, although looking at it now, the hasty purchaser who didn't read the small print could well be expecting it to be a novelisation. If all you read was the King Kong returns, the great ape has held millions spellbound for decades, and now once again his epic tale leaps from the screen. Here is the full dramatic story of the legendary ape, from the terrifying moment he is first seen by the expedition in the jungle, to the mysterious fascination between the monster and the beautiful girl whose life he saves, to his death in the concrete jungles of New York. So if you just read that far, you might think, hey, it's going to be the story. But it isn't. It actually starts with a press conference and ends with the first screening of the movie. So it's a making-of book written in a kind of hard-boiled, cynical journalist style. I'll just read you a little bit. Contains sexism. So this isn't me talking, this is what I'm reading out. Then, as if central casting has been alerted, people resembling real journalists begin rushing through the entrance carrying notepads and cameras. There are the wisecracks and the bloodshot eyes, the tight pants emphasizing too thick female thighs, and the self-consciously unbuttoned shirts that reveal expanses of white-haired male chests and rows of beads, chains and medals. So, slice of 70s life. I think I read this before I saw the film, which was weird. So it was like watching it, I kind of knew, they made the ribs out of prophylactics inflated with water. But this was not the only thing. So there was music as well. Music. Lee Perry and the Upsetters produced an album called The Super Ape. Jumping back to printed stuff. Sometimes you got books or other things that had a little bit of apely content that seemed to be being inflated and massively emphasized as a kind of sort of benefiting from the movie publicity. So you would get a cover to a Conan comic, Savage Sword of Conan 14, brilliant cover for the Shadows of Zambula adaptation, showing what looks like Conan and his female companion. Normally the female companions have one weak ankle. That means they're kind of draped on the ground.
Damn those ankles.
They're standing there with like 8 hands from this flaming-eyed ape sort of reaching for them. So you could be thinking this is going to be a story where Conan fights a giant ape. But the giant ape in the story is just a statue. So, okay, nice. Also, books like this, the first in a series of reprints of Jules de Grandin cult detective stories, happened to come out in 1976. On the cover, a giant ape towering over New York. You could think there's going to be a giant ape in this book. There is an ape, there is a scientifically altered ape, and it's a great story, but it's not in any kind of proportion to New York like you see on the cover. So it's sort of like apes were in the air, if you see what I mean. What else? So more, there was a very unfunny joke book. When I say unfunny, sometimes things are unfunny in a kind of so bad it's good, I'll read you a bit and we can sort of laugh at how not funny it is. This is like below that level where it's just life-sappingly unfunny. Avon brought out a book called The Girl in the Hairy Paw, which despite the rather atrocious title was a pretty interesting set of essays. Stuff reprinted from over the decades about King Kong in general, not really about the new film, but about the sort of the character, the movie, all sorts of different perspectives. That's pretty good. It features, among other things, Philip Jose Farmer's After King Kong Fell story. I think Duncan's going to be talking about at some point. So that was good. I found it on Internet Archive. So, also, comics. DC brought out a collection of reprints. Giant Superheroes Battle Super Gorillas. There on the front, you definitely have an oversized ape clutching a prone Robin with Superman, Batman, and the Flash kind of trying to overcome him. So came out in winter. Like I say, reprints. So you get a Silver Age Superman story, The Super Gorilla from Krypton, where, again, giant gorilla. It's in the jungle. Jimmy Olsen's there on a sort of a journalistic trip. And there's this gorilla that seems to have Superman-like powers, even unto flying. So the theory is that the gorilla must come from Krypton. And Superman has to battle this gorilla. They also, in classic jungle story mode, they find a lost civilization of Romans, who therefore have a Colosseum, and just like happens in, I think, multiple Tarzan stories, they force a battle to happen in the Colosseum, and there's stuff to do with green kryptonite, and it turns out it is from Krypton, but it was actually a man, or a Kryptonian who had been accidentally de-evolved into an ape. They thought sending him into space would mean the cosmic rays would bring him round. Powerful cosmic rays will change him back to human. But he ends up on Earth and heroically sacrifices himself. So in a way, that should be quite a major contribution to the Superman mythos. Why everything that flies away from Krypton ends up on Earth is another matter. There must be an explanation, like ley lines or something.
Yeah, I'd go for that. Definitely.
There's a Flash story too, classic Silver Age stuff back in the days when the explanatory panels would have little hands pointing out into the story, and as is often the case with these Flash stories from this sort of period, there's a kind of weird, like surreal what's going on thing, and this one is about everyone in the world is going at super speed. How is that happening? Turns out the culprit is Gorilla Grodd, a ongoing supervillain who lives in Gorilla City, where he's imprisoned, and he's using mind control to make that happen. Pretty good story. I've always liked Gorilla Grodd because he's got like a motivation, but also he has a certain sort of pathos as well. But that all ends well. And then the final story, probably the oldest one, Batman and Robin, the gorilla boss of Gotham City, has the obligatory giant gorilla. It's a very gritty story. You've got execution, you've got brain swapping, and you've got a gorilla who, again, oversized. I don't know quite why he's so big. Does some of the sort of Kong-like things, like climbing up buildings, and it ends up with the classic fall to the ground. Yeah, like I say, quite a gritty sort of crime type story. So actually, despite the rather odd seeming premise, that's a pretty good collection of reprints. Another thing, and the closest thing there was to a novelisation, was this book, Amok, King of Legend. Was it Amok, perhaps, by Bernard L. Ross? Actually, Ken Follett. Ken Follett, early in his career, writing what he later defines as hackwork, and apparently this was in 4 weeks that he produced it for 1,500 quid. So, got the word king in it. There's a giant ape battling a helicopter, standing on a building. It's the Golden Gate Bridge, not the usual New York skyline. Chris Achilleos cover. So it's kind of leading you to think, well, this is pretty much like King Kong. Hey, there's that new film. Back at the time, seeing this around and reading the title, I imagined that this King of Legend thing, that somehow it would be a story about some kind of semi-mythical creature that sort of originated the stories about the giant apes. But it's not that, unfortunately. In fact, I remember that that's what it was, but it isn't. So it's a pretty similar kind of story, except that unlike King Kong himself, the Amok guy is, again, created by science. A scientist invents a serum that means that each generation of an animal is like twice as big, starting with cats. So Kitten Kong.
Kitten Kong
Gets a bit close to the Kitten Kong idea.
Oh, Kitten Kong, my favourite.
But you've got the giant ape being tracked down, being captured, being brought back to civilization and tragically killed. So basically it's a kind of knockoff. Luckily, unlike the Conga novelisation I was talking about, it's not jam-packed with ridiculous sex scenes every 5 minutes.
Thank the dear good Lord.
No. This is quite good. I mean, it's, obviously, as you'd expect from a writer who went on to be like super popular, it's pretty well crafted, rolls along, kept me interested. So there was that. Lest we forget, it's 1976. Planet of the Apes was still sort of rocking and rolling. The original cycle of movies weren't that old then. The TV series was really recent. Marvel Comics were still producing Planet of the Apes comics. So any spaces that weren't filled up with King Kong, in the manner of polyfiller or spackle, were sort of filled in with Planet of the Apes. Thus I declare 1976 was the year of the ape.
Had I but known that when I trolled off to university,
Mm.
it made life so much richer.
So much apier.
So much apier, yeah. I would have had a much better time than the miserable time that I had.
You could have gone to the Loughborough cinema to see 74-year-old photographer Jessica Lange in the new King Kong movie.
I went to Loughborough Cinema to see Assault on Precinct 13 with my mate Kim.
Oh, so good films came out in 1976 as well.
It was a fantastic film. And we discovered one night coming back from the bar when we were a little bit, well, we were very drunk, that we had to walk back past the tennis courts, and they had that kind of, I don't know what you call it, that wire fencing where it's like interlinked diamondy.
There's a lot of miming of fencing going on.
Yeah. Anyway, we discovered that if you were to hit it with a certain force, it made in our minds, the exact same repeated noise that you got a lot in the film Assault on Precinct 13, which was a sort of noise.
Okay.
Maybe a bit deeper than that, but yeah. So we'd always hit the Assault on Precinct 13 fence whenever we went past tennis courts.
They should put up a blue plaque on
that.
They
should.
Right, well...
and I was also going to say, yes, and I also saw that John Travolta dance.
Night Fever?
What was it called?
Saturday Night Fever.
Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that and it was crap.
Right, okay.
I thought it was crap. But Assault on Precinct 13, busting, mate. Absolutely busting.
Good.
Remake? Nah. Original?
Can't really do that, can you?
Busting.
Alrighty. Back soon with something else.
Try a bit.